Long before anyone was thinking about coins, or banks, or even pockets, people in southern Africa already knew what was up with gold. This wasn't about getting rich in the way we think about it now. You couldn't just walk into a store and buy a new phone with a chunk of gold. No, this was different. Gold was special. It was beautiful, it didn't rust, and it came from the earth. For the indigenous communities, like the people who lived in the kingdom of Mapungubwe around 1,000 years ago, gold was a symbol of power and status. It was the original bling, you know? It showed you were important, that you were a leader. They were way ahead of the game. These ancient artisans were incredibly skilled. They would take this raw gold and turn it into amazing things. We're talking delicate beads, intricate foils, and even sculptures. One of the most famous examples is the little golden rhinoceros found at Mapungubwe Hill. This wasn't just some random decoration, it was a piece of art that represented royalty and the spiritual connection between the leader and the land. They would trade this gold with people from far away, like traders from the Swahili coast who would sail down in their dhows. So, even back then, South African gold was already going international. It was part of a huge network, connecting Africa to the rest of the world. Think about it this way. Money is just something we all agree has value. For us, it's paper notes and numbers on a screen. For them, gold was that thing. It wasn't a coin with a face on it, but it was a medium of exchange and a store of wealth. It was used for dowries, for showing respect to the king, and for making beautiful objects that would last forever. They didn't need a government to tell them gold was valuable. Its beauty and rarity spoke for itself. This deep-rooted history with gold is the foundation for everything that came later. It's like the opening act for a massive show that was about to unfold. So when you see a modern gold coin from South Africa, remember it comes from a long, long line of history. It's not just a recent thing that started with a bunch of guys in suits. The story of South African gold begins centuries ago, with kings and queens on a hill in the Limpopo Valley, crafting beautiful objects that told the world who they were. This ancient connection to the metal is part of the country's DNA. It's the prequel to the whole story, setting the stage for the drama, the conflict, and the incredible wealth that was still buried, waiting to be discovered by the rest of the world. Then, in the 1600s, the ships started arriving. First came the Dutch, setting up a little refreshment station at the Cape. They weren't there to mine gold, they just wanted to get some fresh vegetables for their sailors on the long trip to Asia. Their money system was all about what was happening back in Europe. They brought their own coins, like the Dutch guilder and the Riksdollar. If you were living in the Cape Colony, that's what you used. There was no thought of making local coins, especially not gold ones. The focus was on trade routes, spices, and keeping the Dutch East India Company running smoothly. For nearly 200 years, it stayed that way. The economy was mostly agriculture and trade. People used a mix of different currencies that sailors and merchants brought from all over the world. You'd find Spanish dollars, Indian rupees, and British pounds all jingling in the same purse. It was a messy, complicated system. Imagine going to a shop and the cashier has to do a currency conversion for every single customer. It was chaotic. But still, there was no local mint, no South African money. The colonial powers saw the Cape as an outpost, a stop on the way to somewhere more important, not a place to build a whole new financial system from scratch. Then the British took over from the Dutch in the early 1800s. You'd think maybe they would change things, right? Well, they did. But slowly. They wanted everyone to use British money, pounds, shillings, and pence. It was a way of saying, we're in charge now. They started shipping in British coins and making them the official currency. But again, these were coins made in London, with the British monarch's face on them. The idea of a uniquely South African gold coin was still completely off the table. The colony was there to serve the British Empire, and its money had to reflect that. So for centuries, even though the land had all this gold hidden beneath it, the people living there were using foreign money. It's a classic colonial story. The local resources and identity are ignored in favor of the systems of the ruling power. It created a situation where the economic heart of the region was beating to a rhythm set thousands of miles away in Europe. This complete lack of local coinage, especially gold coinage, shows you how little control the people of the region had over their own economic destiny. It was a long period of waiting, before the ground itself would change the game forever. And then, bam! everything changed. In the late 1800s, people started finding gold. First, it was little bits here and there. But then, in 1886, a man named George Harrison stumbled upon the main gold reef in a place that would become Johannesburg. This wasn't just a little bit of gold. It was the largest gold deposit the world had ever seen. The news spread like wildfire. Suddenly, this quiet, agricultural part of the world became the most exciting place on the planet. People from all over, from Britain, from America, from Australia, packed their bags and rushed to South Africa to make their fortune. The Great Gold Rush was on. This discovery didn't happen in the British Cape Colony. It happened in the independent Boer Republic called the Zuid-Afrikaanse Republiek, or ZAR. The leader of the ZAR was a man named Paul Kruger. He was this old, stern-looking guy with a big beard. He saw all these foreigners, or Uitlanders, flooding into his country, and he realized two things. First, this gold could make his republic incredibly rich and powerful. Second, all these foreigners could cause a lot of trouble, but one thing was clear. The ZAR needed its own money. It couldn't be a rich, independent nation while still using British pounds. It was time for a currency glow-up. So, Paul Kruger's government decided to create the first real South African gold coins. In 1892, they started minting coins called the Pond. The Pond was designed to have the exact same amount of gold as the British gold sovereign. This was a clever move. It made it easy to trade with the British and the rest of the world. But the coin was proudly, distinctly South African. On one side, it had the coat of arms of the Tsar, and on the other side, a portrait of President Paul Kruger himself. It was a huge statement. It said, "We are our own country, with our own leader, and our own wealth." These Kruger ponds became symbols of the Republic's independence and its newfound wealth. A mint was built in Pretoria, and soon these beautiful gold coins were circulating, a tangible sign of the power that came from the ground. The gold rush completely transformed the region. It led to the explosive growth of Johannesburg from a dusty mining camp into a bustling city. It also massively raised the stakes in the conflict between the Boers and the British, who were watching this gold-rich republic with very greedy eyes. The first South African gold coin wasn't just money, it was a political statement and a prelude to war. The tension between the British Empire and the Boer republics, fueled by the massive gold discovery, finally exploded into war. The Second Anglo-Boer War, which started in 1899, was a brutal conflict. The British Army, with its vast resources, quickly advanced, capturing the major cities, including Pretoria, the capital of the Tsar. This was a huge problem for the Boers. Not only were they fighting for their independence, but they had also lost control of their capital city. And with Pretoria gone, so was their mint. They could no longer produce their official Kruger Pond gold coins. But the Boers were incredibly resilient. They refused to give up. They continued fighting a guerrilla war from the countryside, or the veld. The Boer commandos needed money to pay their fighters and to buy supplies from local farmers. But without a mint, what could they do? They had gold, but they couldn't turn it into coins. This is where the story gets really interesting. A small group of Boers decided if they couldn't get to the mint, they would create their own makeshift mint right there in the middle of nowhere. It was a bold, desperate, and brilliant plan. In a remote area in the northeastern Transvaal, they set up a small workshop. They called it the Veld Mint. The conditions were basic, to say the least. They had very little equipment, which they had to move around on wagons to avoid being captured by the British. Using the gold they had, and with some very clever engineering, they managed to create their own dies to stamp coins. They produced a unique gold coin known as the Veld Pond. It was rougher and less refined than the official Kruger Pond, but it was made of real gold and it served its purpose. The Veld Pond is one of the most famous and rarest coins in South African history. On one side, it has the letters Z-A-R and the year 1902. On the other, it simply says EEN Pond, one pond. There's no picture of Kruger, no fancy coat of arms. It was pure function. Only about 986 of these coins were ever made, right at the very end of the war. Each one tells a story of defiance and ingenuity. The Veld Pond represents the last gasp of the Boer Republic's independence, a final act of creating their own money while on the run from the most powerful empire in the world. After the Anglo-Boer War ended in 1902, the Boer republics were gone, and all of South Africa was under British control. The country was united into the Union of South Africa in 1910, but it was still very much part of the British Empire. So, what happened to the money? The Krugerrands and the Veldponds disappeared. The official currency once again became the British pound sterling. For a while, all the coins, including the famous gold sovereigns with St. George slaying a dragon, were still being shipped in from the Royal Mint in London. It was a return to the old colonial way of doing things. But, the gold mines of the Witwatersrand were now producing more gold than ever before. It seemed a bit ridiculous to dig up all this gold in South Africa, ship it all the way to London to be turned into coins, and then ship those coins all the way back to South Africa to be used as money. It was expensive and inefficient. The logical solution was to build a mint right here. So, in 1923, a branch of the British Royal Mint was opened in Pretoria, in the very same building that used to produce the Krugerrands. It was a little ironic, wasn't it? This new Pretoria Mint started producing gold coins that were identical to the ones made in London. They were British gold sovereigns. They had the head of the British monarch, King George V, on one side, and the classic St. George and the dragon design on the other. So, how could you tell the difference? The Pretoria minted sovereigns had a tiny little mint mark on them, the letters SA, to show they were made in South Africa. From 1923 to 1932, millions of these South African-made British sovereigns were produced. They were used all over Africa and became a trusted form of currency. This was a major milestone. For the first time, large quantities of gold coins were being officially minted on South African soil, even if they were British in design. It showed that the country's gold industry was so important that even the British Empire had to acknowledge it by setting up a local mint. These sovereigns represented a strange period in South African history, a time of being both a part of the British Empire and a country with its own powerful identity, built on gold. These coins were the bridge between the old colonial system and the future independent currency that was yet to come. The 1920s and early 1930s were, honestly, a really turbulent time for the world economy. It was the era of the Great Depression, when economies were collapsing and people were losing faith in paper money. In times of crisis, people have always turned to gold, because it holds its value. But as the Depression worsened, countries around the world started to abandon the gold standard. Now, the gold standard was a system where the value of a country's paper money was directly linked to a certain amount of gold. In theory, you could walk into a bank and exchange your paper notes for gold coins. Britain abandoned the gold standard in 1931, and this put South Africa in a very difficult position. As part of the British Commonwealth, there was huge pressure on South Africa to do the same. But here's the thing. South Africa was the world's biggest gold producer. The government, led by Prime Minister J.B.M. Hertzog, was really reluctant to leave the gold standard. They believed that being linked to gold was a sign of economic strength and stability. So for over a year, South Africa held on, while the value of the British pound fell. This made South African exports very expensive and honestly hurt the economy badly. Finally, at the end of 1932, the pressure just became too much. South Africa officially abandoned the gold standard. It was a monumental decision. It meant that gold coins would no longer be used as everyday currency. You couldn't get them from the bank anymore. The era of gold coins circulating freely in people's pockets, which had started with the Krugerrands 40 years earlier, was over. The Pretoria Mint stopped making the gold sovereigns for circulation. Of course, gold was still being mined, but now it was held in large bars by the central bank to back the value of the country's paper money, the South African pound. This decision marked a fundamental shift in the role of gold. It went from being active, circulating money, to being a passive asset held in vaults. For the average person, gold became something distant and abstract, not something you could hold in your hand. The clinking sound of gold coins in the marketplace was replaced by the rustle of paper notes. It was honestly the end of a romantic era. But while gold coins disappeared from daily life, the story of South African gold was far from over. A new chapter was about to begin, one that would see a South African gold coin become the most famous in the world. The decades following World War II saw a major political shift in South Africa. The National Party came to power in 1948 and began implementing its policy of apartheid. At the same time, there was a growing movement among the white Afrikaner population to break away from the last ties to the British Empire and create a republic. This was a long-held dream, going all the way back to the days of Paul Kruger and the old Tsar. They wanted a country that was fully independent, with its own head of state, and its own national symbols, including its own currency. This dream became a reality in 1961, after a referendum, where only white people could vote. South Africa left the British Commonwealth and declared itself a republic. This was a huge moment of symbolic change, and to go along with this new political status, the country needed a new currency. The old South African pound, with its system of pounds, shillings and pence, was a clear reminder of the British colonial past. It was honestly time for something new, something modern, and something uniquely South African. So, the government introduced the rand. The new currency was named after the Witwatersrand Rand, the ridge where all the gold had been discovered, which was the source of the country's wealth. The name itself was a tribute to gold. The rand also introduced a decimal system, 100 cents to 1 rand. This was much simpler than the old British system. 2 rand were made equal to 1 old South African pound. New banknotes and coins were designed, featuring South African wildlife and the portrait of Jan van Riebeeck, the Dutch man, who had established the first European settlement at the Cape in 1652. The creation of the rand was more than just a practical change, it was a powerful statement of national identity. By ditching the pound, South Africa was symbolically cutting its final monetary ties to Britain. It was asserting its independence on the world stage. However, at this point, there were still no new gold coins being issued for the public. The country's immense gold wealth was still locked away in the vaults of the Reserve Bank, but the stage was now set. With a new republic and a new currency, the idea of creating a new, truly South African gold coin was just around the corner. By the mid-1960s, South Africa was producing over 70% of the world's gold. But there was a problem. Under international law at the time, it was illegal for private citizens in many countries, including the United States, to own gold bullion, those bars of gold. However, it was perfectly legal to own foreign gold coins. The South African Chamber of Mines saw a brilliant opportunity. What if they created a new gold coin, not for use as money in South Africa, but specifically for people around the world to buy as a way of owning gold? It was honestly a genius loophole, and so the Krugerrand was born. The first coins were minted on July 3, 1967. The name was a combination of 2 famous South African symbols, Kruger, from President Paul Kruger, whose portrait was on the old Tsar pawns, and rand, the new currency. The design was steeped in history and national pride. On one side, it featured the same portrait of Paul Kruger that was used on the original 1892 pond. On the other side was a beautiful image of a springbok, one of South Africa's national animals. This was a coin designed to be proudly South African. What made the Krugerrand revolutionary was its concept. It was the world's first bullion coin. It contained exactly 1 troy ounce of pure gold. The coin itself weighs a little more than an ounce because it's made of a durable alloy of gold and copper, which gives it that distinctive orange gold color, but the pure gold content is exactly 1 ounce. This made it incredibly easy for investors. You didn't need to worry about complicated weights or purity levels. You just bought a Krugerrand, and you knew you had 1 ounce of gold. It had no face value. Its value was tied directly to the daily price of gold. The Krugerrand was a massive, runaway success. It was marketed brilliantly all over the world. Suddenly, ordinary people, not just banks and governments, had an easy way to buy and own gold. By 1980, the Krugerrand accounted for a staggering 90% of the global gold coin market. It was so popular that other countries, like Canada with the maple leaf, the United States with the eagle, and Australia with the nugget, all launched their own 1-ounce gold coins to compete. But the Krugerrand was the original, the one that started it all. It single-handedly created the modern gold bullion coin market. The global success of the Krugerrand came to a screeching halt in the 1980s. As opposition to the apartheid government grew around the world, many countries imposed economic sanctions on South Africa. The Krugerrand, as a famous symbol of the country, became a primary target. In 1985, the United States, which had been its biggest market, banned the import of Krugerrands. Other countries followed suit. It became illegal to buy or sell them in many places. The coin that had been a symbol of South Africa's wealth now became a symbol of its political isolation. Production plummeted. This ban lasted until the end of apartheid. When Nelson Mandela was released from prison in 1990, and the country began its transition to democracy, the world started to open up again. The sanctions were lifted in 1991, but the Krugerrand had lost its dominant position. Other countries' coins had filled the gap in the market. The South African Mint, now under the leadership of a new democratic government, faced the challenge of rebuilding the coin's reputation. They had to reintroduce the Krugerrand to a world that had moved on. The post-apartheid era saw a revival and a new strategy for South Africa's gold coins. The mint continued to produce the classic 1-ounce Krugerrand for investors, but it also expanded the range. They introduced smaller versions, half-ounce, quarter-ounce, and 10th-ounce, to make them more accessible to people with less money to invest. They also began producing high-quality proof versions specifically for collectors. These proof coins have a mirror-like finish and are minted in limited numbers, making them highly sought after. The focus shifted from just selling gold to creating beautiful, collectible works of art. Today, the Krugerrand is once again one of the most respected and widely traded gold bullion coins in the world. To celebrate its 50th anniversary in 2017, the South African Mint even released special editions in silver and platinum for the first time. They've also introduced advanced security features, like micro-text and laser-etched designs, to prevent counterfeiting. Modern South African gold coins, especially the Krugerrand, represent a story of survival and reinvention. They carry the weight of a complex history, from colonial rule and Republican ambition to global protest and democratic rebirth, all captured in a small shining disk of gold.